church and those that are out there watching us here on Behind the Pulpit. Man, that music just kind of gets you want to get up and out of your seat and dancing a little bit. We're glad you're joining us here for our weekly Behind the Pulpit podcast. Sorry we were not with you last week. It was Memorial Day weekend, and so we took the week off. But now we're back. We're into June, and if you don't know, my name's Bob Erbig. I'm one of the pastors here at Millington Baptist Church, and generally hosting this Behind the Pulpit podcast. I am joined by a very special guest today. Right here to my right, I want to introduce you to a guy named Noah Graves. Oh, there he is. Noah, look, popping up. Noah, what's up? How you doing?
Doing real well. Very excited to be here. It's actually my first time recording here in the new podcast room. And
well, you are in for a treat, my friend.
Yes, I am. And it's very exciting to be here.
I know. Well, check out this shiplap stuff behind you. It's just making you feel like you're rustic and professional and all that. So good. Glad you're here with us. How was your week last week? You were out. You took a little trip down to the Carolinas. How'd that go for you?
Yeah, it was great. We went down to Outer Banks, my whole family. We had all the little nieces and nephews there, so a lot of little kids running around.
Okay.
And
I heard there was some noise.
Yes,
some citations from the local police.
Yes, it was definitely loud at times, but it was a great week. Very relaxing. Got to play a little bit of pickleball. Got to watch some TV and all that.
Portable pickleball down on the beach. Pickleball on the beach?
Not on the beach, but
okay.
Near the beach. But yeah, beautiful weather and a lot of fun.
All right. Hey, pickleball, it's taken off. It's all over the place. So make sure you go. I was at Costco the other week, and you could buy a pickleball paddle, like a pickleball set, for like $80, which I thought was a lot, but maybe you can get cheaper ones out there. Anyway, it's all the rage across the United States. Noah is simultaneously serving dual roles this summer. Noah is our executive assistant to the pastoral leadership team, but he's also doing a pastoral internship here this summer. And Noah, you got some exciting things happening. Maybe tell us a little bit about what's coming up this summer.
Yeah, so as Pastor Rob said, I'll be doing a little bit of additional interning work this summer, which I'm very excited about. So there'll be some varying different things that I'll be doing, kind of bouncing around a little bit. But two things specifically I wanted to highlight is one of the things that we'll be doing every Sunday night at 6 p.m. is a weekly event called Games on the Grounds. And so what we'll be doing is we'll be playing pickleball every Sunday night in the Millington Baptist Church parking lot. So we've already gotten our first 3 weeks in. It's been a lot of fun. We have a couple of nets set up. A lot of people have showed up, so we play pickleball. We also have the frisbee thrown around a little bit sometimes. So it's a lot of fun. So if you're ever looking for something to do on a Sunday night, we would love for you guys to join us for some pickleball.
All right. It's been pretty intense. There's a lot of competitive people out there as it comes to the pickleball arena. But that's not all. Noah, what else is happening?
That's right. Yeah, so also on July 8th at 6 p.m., which is a Saturday night, we'll be having an evangelistic revival event. So we're calling it a Night of Hope. And so the goal behind this event is for our church and also churches nearby to invite those who we know who don't know Jesus and who aren't saved to come out to the event. And so what we'll be doing at the event is we'll be having some time of worship. So we'll be worshiping. There'll also be some food and some snacks for people to have. But then also we're going to be having a gospel message. So we're going to have a clear gospel presentation and a call to faith. So it'll be a great opportunity for people in our community and our area who don't know Jesus to hear the gospel. So also we'd love for some prayer for that because we know that we can't do that alone. We definitely need the Lord to do what only He can do. So very excited for that revival event. So it should be a great Saturday in July.
Yeah, very cool. So we're calling it a Night of Hope. That's the night.
Night of Hope.
And if people want to come, what are the details? What are the times? If they want to invite a friend, when should they be here? What do they need to know?
Yeah, so it's on Saturday, July 8th at 6 p.m. So we'll be having the tent set up next to the YFMB for the whole month of July. So the entire event will be taking place underneath the tent. So we'll be having seats there, but hopefully we'll have a lot of people, and so hopefully everyone won't be able to fit underneath the tent. So if you have little beach chairs, lawn chairs kind of thing, or a blanket, feel free to bring those as well. They'll just be parking like normal in the church lot. And like I said before, just invite unbelievers, invite your friends, family, coworkers, whoever it is, and invite them, spread the word. We just want as many people here who don't know Jesus as possible.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Noah. I appreciate your heart for those that don't know Christ. And we'll talk a little bit here in a minute about, you preached the other week about Paul says, the only thing I want to know is Christ and the power of his resurrection, and we'll talk a little bit about what that means and why that's important for us to be sharing that message with those that are around us. So thanks for the good work you're doing. Glad you're here today. Before we get into that, we have been doing a couple different sections here on Behind the Pulpit. So we talk a little bit about what's going on in our lives, then we talk about what's going on in the church, and then we talk about what's going on in the news. So if you're somebody who pays attention to what's out there, what's going on, there's a number of things that are happening, culturally speaking, that we want to draw your attention to and maybe help you think a little bit about from a Christian lens. So you may know we are in June, and June now is officially Pride Month. And so for Christians that hold on to traditional sexual ethics, that's it's been kind of hard to think about. How do you engage with companies and social media and all that stuff where this is, the message is out there. You can't hide from it. And one recent piece of news that I came across, and probably you came across too, related to this topic, is something going on with the LA Dodgers. The LA Dodgers were having I think they were calling it a night of pride, or Pride Night, June 16th, and they invited a group called the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence to come and perform at this Pride Night at Dodger Stadium. And the reason this has been such a controversial thing is that the Dodgers invited this group, and then they uninvited them because there was people that were upset about it, and then other people got upset about it, and they re-invited them, and so now they're still coming on June the 16th. Now, if you don't know who the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence is, I found an article that kind of highlighted what they do. The group is a self-described order of queer and trans nuns that started in 1979, and they have a mission to go out and share their message, and their calling card is an imitation of Roman Catholic nuns, but with a twist. Their motto is to go forth and sin some more. Not sin no more, but to sin some more. And so a lot of people were not digging this because their performances can be fairly explicit, and a lot of people would say sacrilegious as it relates to depictions of Christ, even, and Catholic leaders. And so, I think this has been something that's been challenging for people to think through. Some of the players that are on the Dodgers, Clayton Kershaw, famous pitcher, and there was one or two others that have actually stood up and said, they don't appreciate this, and it's caused a bit of controversy in the news. Have you been following this at all, Noah, or am I sharing something new for you right now?
It's definitely something new for me. I definitely had heard quite a bit about, some of the other things that sports teams are doing with some of the Pride Month stuff, but I definitely just very surprised to hear how far this team of the Dodgers was willing to go with their celebration of Pride Night, and it's just a very shocking story to hear.
Yeah, so I think there's an issue. We live in a pluralistic country, and people are going to have different points of view, and even within the Christian community surrounding this, there's different points of view depending on how your view of the Bible and things like that. But to me, when I've read the descriptions of this and everything I've heard, it seems like this is kind of just taking it a bit over the line, especially if you're going to be at events where there's going to be kids and things of that nature. So I think from a Christian perspective, we do believe everybody's made in the image of God. And whenever I talk with people about this topic, I think it's important to remember that everybody's made in the image of God. Not everybody is a child of God, but everybody's made in the image of God. And it is important to love people that are made in the image of God, to pursue them, to share the message of the gospel and Christ with them. But there also is a sense where you might need to stand up and be bold for your faith and put lines on certain things and certain messages that are out there, and that's where the tension I think is coming with this. It seems like people and a baseball organization has kind of gone over the line on this. So that's something that's in the news right now that people are wrestling with, but there's a whole host of other things. I don't know. Do you got a news story you want to highlight right now, Noah?
I don't have any news stories that are actually coming to my mind right away, but Yeah, definitely. As you were saying, it's definitely a tough situation to wrestle with. But other than that,
Yeah.
yeah, not too many news stories are coming to my mind.
Yeah, how do we love people and how do we uphold God's standards? That's what I think people have
Right.
just been wrestling with recently, especially when the messages are kind of in our face all the time. You can't really get away from it. You can't walk into, I mean, Target's another thing. You can't walk into Target right now. That's been a big controversy in the news without having the messages in your face. So what are you supposed to, kind of what are you supposed to do? People really wrestling with that. So that's what's going on in the news, at least one or two things. There's other things we can talk about, but I think that's enough for today. Let's move into our next section. We have been going through the book of Philippians. We came to Philippians chapter 3, and we are, today we're going to look at the entirety of Philippians chapter 3 because we're behind 1 week. Noah preached on May the 28th on the first half of Philippians 3, and then I spoke yesterday on the second half of Philippians 3. So we figured we'd tag team today and just dive into the whole chapter. So Noah, Philippians chapter 3, verse 1 to 11, you gave the image at the beginning of the message, and feel free to summarize this after I mention this. This image at the beginning of the message about the Formula One racer. So tell me what that was about and how that tied in with your overall message that you talked about from Philippians 3, 1 to 11.
Yeah, so as Pastor Bob said, one of the things that I focused on for the message was these Formula One drivers. And so there's actually only 20 of them in the world. So these are like the best drivers on the planet. And so there's this pressure on them for them to perform as drivers and for them to do certain things as drivers. And then if they don't do those things, if they don't do what they're supposed to do, then they're out. They lose their seat as a driver. And so the connection that I was drawing towards Philippians 3, verses 1 to 11 was that, there was this group called the Judaizers, and they were saying something very similar in that, not only do you have to believe on Jesus to be saved, but you also have to do certain things and perform, you might say, as a Christian. And one of the main things that they were saying you need to do is you need to be circumcised. That yes, you need to believe on Jesus, but you also need to be circumcised in order to keep your seat as a Christian. So that was the connection there.
Okay, so it's kind of a Jesus plus something in order to be saved,
Yep.
right? Whatever it is in that context,
Yeah.
circumcision. But that's something that we can easily fall into, right? We can always think, oh, I need Jesus plus all these good works. I need Jesus plus this in order to find salvation. Interesting. You mentioned the idea of losing your seat in the car. Is that something that you thought that Paul was drawing out, that we can, have our seat because of Christ, but yet we can lose it because of our actions? Is that something he was saying in there?
Yeah, I think that's something that was in the general, theme of what Paul was talking about. Paul was really saying was that, your righteousness comes through faith. In one of the parts of the passage, he says your righteousness comes through faith, and the other part he says your righteousness depends on faith. So the main heart behind verses 1 to 11 is that, righteousness comes from Jesus. Righteousness does not come from what I do or what I did. It only comes through Jesus. And so, I think there really is an eternal security element to this passage in that, you don't need to be circumcised in order to keep your salvation, or you don't need to do, certain things as a Christian in order to, remain saved. And then also something I mentioned was that, that's not a license to sin. In Romans, there's a part where Paul talks about this, and he says, are we to go on sinning? Or he says, do we overthrow the law because we're saved by grace through faith? And then Paul says a few times, he says, by no means. He says, by no means, we uphold the law. And so that's something important to remember is that, yes, we are saved by faith, nothing that we do. But that's not a license to sin. That's also not a license to overthrow the law. But that's a freedom to live without sin. It's a freedom to obey the law. But we never obey the law. We never uphold the law in order to be saved or to keep our salvation. But we obey the law and keep the law because we are saved and because we are secure through Jesus.
Yeah. So you be in that. I don't know if the camp is the right word, but you be of the mindset that you are once saved and you are always saved. You can't lose your salvation. But I think what's interesting about Paul in chapter 2 and 3 here, he's got some of these interesting, seemingly contradictory phrases. So Philippians 2, I think it's verse 14 that I preached about a few weeks ago. There's that famous verse about work out your salvation, right? But then also in that verse, or the next verse, he says it's God who's at work in you, right? So, is it my efforts or is it God's efforts? And people get confused by that. And how would you speak to that?
Yeah, I think one of the big things with
I
that,
got some thoughts, but how would you speak to it?
I think one of the big things that comes to mind with that passage, I think I heard this from John MacArthur, if I remember correctly, where they're saying that how that passage says to work out your salvation. It doesn't say to work for your salvation.
That's good.
So that was kind of the thing that really stuck with me, was reminding myself is that I have my salvation and I'm going to work out that salvation. I don't need to work for it because I've received that salvation through Jesus. And I think the thing that, always comforts me in this, aspect to our Christian faith is what Jesus said in John 10:28, where he says, I give them eternal life and they will never perish and no one will snatch them out of my hand. That's the thing that's always comforted me most, knowing that I'm in Jesus's hand, and from his words himself, he said that no one will snatch me out of his hand. So I think that's the comfort that we all need as a Christian, knowing that we are secure in Jesus's hands and we don't need to fear that, we're going to be snatched out of his hand, but we're secure in him.
Yeah, that John 10 passage is pretty compelling. I think it's always been so for me as well. Kind of trumps the what people would argue being the enigmatic passages in places like Hebrews 6 and 10 and all that. But anyway, so maybe before we move on to the second half of chapter 3, you ended the message by talking, and Paul ends that section talking about his desire to know Christ and the power of his resurrection. What exactly does that mean? How does he know him through the power of his resurrection?
Yeah, so that's definitely one of the parts of the passage that I had a more difficult time really kind of wrestling through with what Paul was trying to say there. When I looked at the whole ending to the passage there, because it kind of seems like a sharp shift, because he's talking about righteousness through faith, and then all of a sudden he's talking about sharing in his sufferings and knowing the power of his resurrection. And when I looked at that passage, I know what Paul says is that he says, that I may know him, and he also says that I may share his sufferings and that I may know the power of his resurrection. I think those two parts of sharing his sufferings and knowing the power of his resurrection are very important things, because I think there's a certain connection with someone that you have when you know what they're going through or know what they went through. Maybe it's someone who has the same illness as you or has the same, hardship that they're going through that you also went through. And there's this certain degree of closeness that you experience with them where it's, wow, I know what they're going through. So I think that's part of what Paul is saying here with the sharing in his sufferings. When Christ suffered for us, that's something that we get to understand a little bit of a taste of when we suffer. But then also with the power of his resurrection, I think that's something that it's hard to understand for me personally exactly what Paul was saying there. That's definitely part of the passage that I definitely had a hard time, exegeting and taking a closer look at. So I'm not sure if you might have some insight there. Yeah,
I think some of the reading that I did for the beginning of chapter 3, verse 12, where he's talking about not that I've already obtained all this or I'm already made perfect, that there's a sense that Paul wanted to have a knowledge about Christ and who he was, but also an experience of union with Christ. And that means that, Christ did suffer, he died, and that's the picture that we give when we do baptism, right? So yeah, there's that element that he wanted to not just know Christ, but also experience what it was like to live, with him. And the power of the resurrection, I think, is getting at things that Paul writes in his other letters. So, for example, 1 Corinthians 15 is the really important chapter on the resurrection, where he talks about Christ is the first fruits, right? So Christ rose again, new body, and then one day he's going to come back and bring us with him, and we're going to get new bodies as well. He's the first fruits of the resurrection, and then secondarily, I would also say, in terms of living for Christ and experiencing sufferings, a lot of people live life where they're just, I'm suffering, things are hard, but they forget that there also is a resurrection power there, that Jesus didn't just die, he rose again from the dead and offers us power to live every single day, trusting in him and what he's done for us, resting in that. And so he does start to get into that more in the second half of chapter 3, because our big idea from the message this last week was that no matter where you are on the arc of life, the end game is that heavenward call of following after Christ. And at the end, we learn that when Jesus comes back, he's coming back, verse 21, with power, the power that enabled him, to bring all things under his control. So this idea of power, the dunamis, is really kind of a prevalent theme throughout this whole chapter. So I don't know if that added a little bit to what you said. That was just kind of my initial thoughts here. You want to pivot to the second half of chapter 3, and you got any questions for me from yesterday?
Absolutely. So I know in part of your message you mentioned 4 prime idols that people today typically wrestle with, and those being comfort, control, power, and reputation. And so one of the questions that came to my mind was, how can we keep these idols in check? Because I think those 4 things are things that a lot of us struggle with. So what are some practical ways that we can keep those things in check and not allow them to become idols? Or if they have become an idol, how to put those things in their proper place?
Yeah, no, hey, great question. That's something we're wrestling with every single day. I still wrestle with. Let me just talk contextually about this section of Scripture. So 12 to 21, a big theme is Paul giving the image of a runner who is forgetting what is behind in their life and straining towards what is ahead. And we talked about pursuing the right prize, the prize of knowing Christ and his heavenward call for us. But the warning that he offers to the Philippian Christians and to us today is the fact that it's very easy to get distracted from pursuing that prize. We can pursue other prizes. We could follow other patterns of people that we think are successful. But Paul he has a continual future orientation in what he's saying in the second half of chapter 3 here, which the climax is verse 20 and 21, where he talks about us being citizens of heaven and the second coming of Christ. Now, in terms of those 4 idols, I brought those up because I think those are examples of things that can distract us from keeping our eyes fixed on Jesus and running that race. And the nuance with that is that the idols are they're deeper idols that are beneath kind of the surface interactions that we do. So if you look at, well, why did I do that? One of these idols often is underneath that. So comfort. We do a lot of things out of comfort. I think people start to idolize certain things because they just want to be comfortable. I don't want to move from that. I don't want to make a difficult move because I'm comfortable where I am. But maybe God's calling you to do something outside your comfort zone. So let's for example, let's talk about your Night of Hope, right? An evangelistic event. I think nowadays it's really hard for people to invite friends and have conversations about their faith because it's uncomfortable, right? And then secondly, that idol of reputation, which I think is a big one. If I actually tell people that I have a certain belief system, or if I bring up the gospel and how people need to know Jesus, well, I might get a reputation for that, and people might not want to be friends with me. So there is kind of this acceptance, reputation thing that's underneath why we don't do certain actions. And then we start to get distracted off of what Christ is calling us to do. So that makes sense? Or you want me to give you want to give an example for each of them?
I think that's really good, especially when you're saying the reputation element to it, because I think that even ties into verses 1 to 11, where Paul says that I may share his sufferings. Because I think when we all read that, we initially think physical sufferings. And I think in the original context for the church in Philippi, that's probably what it meant. Because, in the first century Christianity, they were often being persecuted and even killed for their faith. But for us here in America, that's not really something that we have an issue with. Thankfully, but I think that there is an element of social suffering. And I think Christ experienced some social suffering as well. When he was shamed on the cross, when he claimed to be the Son of God, yet people insulted him and attacked him. So he had to suffer socially. And I think that's something that we may have to suffer as well, where, even tying in, the Pride Night that we were talking about before, where in these times in life, we may need to stand up for the truth. We need to stand up for God and for Christ. And that may mean a little bit of reputation being hurt. It also may mean a little bit of social suffering. That's a chance to experience the same suffering that Jesus went through.
Yeah, that's a really great example, and I agree. I think we're probably not in America concerned that somebody's going to be knocking on our door, dragging us out, and beating us But I think people have felt, especially in the last 10 years, that there is this kind of social ostracism where, you're not accepted in certain circles, or you can't be friends with that person, or you might lose your job if you hold on to certain things. Or even, I've heard, it may be that you can't bank with certain institutions. Like, there's all different kinds of things that can happen that aren't revolved around being stoned to death physically. But you may... I think people nowadays are understanding that it might cost something to follow Christ, even if it's not your life. It might be your comfort. If you're somebody who likes control, you don't like to live in the chaos. You always have to have your schedule and your time. But God may be calling us to be more flexible, so our idol might be control. Yeah, so there's a lot to be said there, and I don't want to go on and on, but I think people kind of get the point about those.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, anything else about the message that you wanted to draw out?
I think that was everything. Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely.
All right. Good. Well, thanks for being here, Noah. This is a good conversation. Philippians chapter 3, just a great man. What a great section for us. Yeah, and I would just highlight maybe the 3 points that we had in that message was that if you want to leave a spiritual legacy for Jesus, you have to pursue the right prize, you have to choose the right pattern, have the right people investing in your life, and then you have to stay at the right post, which is what we were starting to talk about at the end here, that until Jesus comes back, God wants us to make an influence in all the spheres of society that we've been given. And the right post is where you are right now, even if that's something that's uncomfortable. So, looking forward to chapter 4 next week. Rob Mittuck's going to be with us talking about the peace that passes all understanding. And that's going to be a good message, I think.
Absolutely.
All right. Good. All right, Tim, we are at the end here. So what we've been doing is we've been doing the theology sprint. So I need something to sprint with as we close out our time today.
Well, first of all, good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone.
Tim is hiding behind the camera over there.
Today was
my
my first podcast in a while where I didn't have a coughing fit in the back, so congratulations to me.
Good. The healing power of the white tree of Gondor behind you.
I'm very excited for these chapter 4 sermons coming up.
It's chapter 4 it's like a crescendo in Philippians.
Yes. It's funny. I had 2 options for the theology sprint today, but one of them was actually answered during the course of the podcast, so now I only have one option.
Okay, so
it was talking about the
I can't pass.
of,
I got to answer it somehow.
Can a believer lose their salvation? Noah hit on that a little bit, and you guys did as well. So our theology sprint for today is, Pastor Bob, do we have the correct books of the Bible?
Do we have the correct books of the Bible? Yes. The Bible tells us that His Word is God-breathed, and if you don't know how the Bible came about, there's a couple good books I can recommend for you, but we don't have the original autographs, but what we do have are copies, and we can trust the transmission process in terms of how it happened. I mean, if you go back and you look at the people that were copying these things, like the detail that they took to actually translate and copy things effectively was just absolutely amazing. And the other thing I would say is that there's people that actually engage in something called textual criticism, which not many people do that, but there is a lot of evidence and tons of manuscripts. We have more manuscripts than any other ancient document that people have compiled together, making sure they align and they agree, and we can trust with a great degree of certitude that the words that we have today are the words that God intended us to have, that He revealed to the human authors that wrote down the words of God in the Bible.
Sweet. Thank you.
I can say more about that, but that's all I can say in about 60
just a
seconds.
Sprint.
That's right. I was
not a marathon
sprinting.
like we were talking
That's
about
right.
yesterday.
That's right. There you go.
I was paying attention.
All right. Thank you. All right. Well, thanks so much for being here with us today for Behind the Pulpit. Noah, we're glad you were here. Hopefully you can come back later in the summer before you finish off the internship. We will see you next week for Behind the Pulpit.